publication of the Nuremberg Code. Where are we? Where do we need to go? What can we say? What can we do to make sure that we honor the past, we reflect upon the past, and moving forward, we protect the future? And I'm going to go down the line to make it easy. So Omar, go right ahead, please.
Sure. Well, I guess some of these lessons that we mentioned, one I take from it is the conflation of our science and our ethics, where we think we can determine our ethics from looking at our science, which is really hard to do and very easy to do in a kind of ideological context, whether totalitarian or otherwise. The other is the politicization of the guild or the profession's ethics. I think they have some inherent integrity to them, whether it's non-maleficence, do no harm, beneficence, social justice. They're intrinsic to the profession. They've been developed over time. But when you have outside political ideologies infect that, you do have a lot of sort of corruption. You see that in the Soviet Union as well. You see that in various different countries. And then I guess the other lesson we mentioned about needing third parties to oversee hospitals and doctors. I would include lawyers because of their contribution to human rights legislation and understanding of how courts and governments work, as well as laypersons and physicians and representatives. But for the reasons mentioned about anytime you have a group of people with similar interests, you're going to have group polarization and groupthink. So you need checks and balances on that, just like how our government is organized by the founders. Fourth, I think, the dignity of the individual sticks out. A lot of these things could have been objected to if there was a strong emphasis on the inviolability or deontological rules against killing and harming. So those things come out of the tradition of the West and Athens and Jerusalem. And that is a great lesson that I take from this, because without that, you really do slide into the social organism being prior to the individual and utilitarian forms of ethics where killing might be obligated to help others other than the individual. And you see that also in other societies outside of Germany. The way China does bioethics, honor killings, why families rationalize chaining their psychotic relative to a bed or putting them in a cage, all by the same rationales that you see expressed in German society, but without any emphasis on the dignity of the individual. And then I'd say, since I think in the last 70 years also you see a corrective against paternalism, but you see a corrective against extreme forms of individualist autonomy, expressive individualism going into medicine as well. Because if you imagine, what would a purely autonomy as a primary value hospital look like, a libertarian hospital? It would basically be a place where you run to the emergency room and you say, I want to kill myself, and the doctor says, well, let's express your unique needs and autonomy. Here's some cyanide. Or I've rationally decided, like little Woody Allen in Annie Hall, the universe is expanding. I want to, it's not worth it. The doctor would say, well, let's just get that autonomy on the table for you. And so health is a normative concept. It's an intrinsically normative concept. It's not the same as autonomy. So what it means to be healthy and to flourish is something separate from expressing your desires and your wishes. So the doctor's obligation and a hospital's obligation is to maximize the individual in community and their flourishing. So that's something richer than just autonomy. So, because sometimes we have overcorrected from the Nuremberg Code in the Nazi era towards anything goes. So I take those as the lessons.
Thank you.
So really, there's not much to add after Omar, but I would like to add a couple of things, and that is that as someone who teaches and as actually a very important perspective that I get is being the wife of my husband, who's a physics professor at Columbia University. So he gets to teach the medical students a course that many of them find as one of the most difficult obstacles in their profession, in their professional development. So I come across a lot of very, very strange things that students do in their desperate attempt to get through and become doctors. Some of those things are very unethical things, which again makes me think very much about our very, very competitive society in which, as you say, doctors and others, but let's say doctors right now, have enormous amounts of material to learn and to get through just in order to acquire the competencies and the skills that they need to. But in some ways, we are overloading them so much with that there's no room left for ethical development and for an emphasis on that. And so, you know, we run the risk, again, which was pointed out by Yehuda Bauer, a very famous Holocaust researcher in Jerusalem, who said the Nazi doctors were highly educated barbarians, meaning that these were highly educated people using their highly sophisticated knowledge in cruel and inhumane ways. And I think that, and even sometimes in cruel and inhumane experiments, which were aimed at increasing knowledge and medical knowledge, and they did. Someone mentioned here before the hypothermia experiments. These are experiments that are essentially the basis of what we know about these things very much. So very important lessons that were learned at a terrible cost. And I think the whole issue raises for us the question how to integrate still an ethical emphasis into the education of physicians in particular and healthcare providers in general.
Excellent. Thank you.
Oh,
So I'd like to take a slightly different tack and address the last part of the remarks on the healthcare system. It seems to me that the most important lesson for me from the Holocaust and physicians is that the obligation of physicians is to patients and families and not to the state. I find myself in America at this moment alienated from the state. And it seems to me that the goal of medicine has got to be to ensure that everyone has access to health care. And any actions that undercut that basic commitment to health care for all are, I think, unethical. I found the discussions in Congress deeply disgusting. I have the same problem with present discussions about tax relief. I am out of sympathy with the state. And therefore, it seems to me, I know there are complaints about the 17-minute visit because my geriatric colleagues tell me they can't get their patients' clothes off in 17 minutes. There are problems with longitudinal studies for pay for performance, but basically, America has a decent healthcare system for those of us connected, and a terrible healthcare system for those who are not. And that, it seems to me, is the overriding lesson of the Holocaust, that medicine has to be true to patients and families.
Thank you.
Well, I don't know what I can say in answer to that. Of course, I agree. Coming from Israel, working as a family physician for Kupat Cholim Klalit, as a public health provider, not in private practice at all. 35 years being a physician already, I can honestly say that I'm proud of the system that I work for. We have national health insurance, where we are one of the, I can honestly say that every single citizen of Israel has health insurance. We might not all will be able to get nose jobs and breast implants, covered, but if we have serious medical issues, every citizen in Israel is covered. So I can actually, I'm proud of that. Palliative medicine has improved immensely. I am very deeply sad, of course, to hear this, your personal story, but I would hope, I would like to think, and I think I have about 2,000 patients on my list. I do not hear any more stories like that of, you know, an orthopedic surgeon saying that this is my principles, my faith, and I cannot help my patient. I would like to believe that that doesn't happen. It certainly shouldn't. Palliative medicine is being learned by physicians and students, of course, more or all over the world. And I think, basically, I'm not a philosopher, and I don't believe in talking, I believe in doing. And I think that the only way, or what I take home, is that we have to teach. We have to teach humanities to medical students. They can also read books and talk about art and talk about feelings, and not only anatomy, physiology, and physics. Don't even remind me. You know what it's like doing physics in Hebrew when you don't know Hebrew? Oh. Anyway, very traumatic. But I seriously would recommend, I mean, the only way to do it is to teach. We can't, unfortunately, teach doctors too much. We are unteachable. We know everything. But students, there's still hope. And I think that we have to include it into, I think it's getting more accepted to introduce humanities into the medical curriculum, even if it's so crowded. There's a limit as to how much, you can read and learn anatomy from the books. You cannot learn humanities or ethics from the books. You have to have role models who perform correctly, and you have to teach, you have to talk to students. Our class, we've been doing it for 15 years on medicine and the Holocaust. We have had years, we have had minimal attendance, and we've gone ahead and done the class. And now we have to get permission because we've got too many students who want to come. And I'm very happy to say that this year we have half Arab students and half Jewish students. So it's wonderful, and we have the most fantastic course. And every year the students say they don't understand why it's not compulsory. Of course, the dean and whatever, the politics behind it, you know, why do we have to get permission for somebody who wants to come and listen to what we have to say? But the only way to do this is to teach and to talk, and it depends on the person, the people involved. You need somebody who's passionate about it to do it.
Thank you.
Yeah, again, after this, I really don't have much to add. I would just say, when with regards to teaching, there's teaching about something, and there's teaching to do something. And we see this in clinical practice. I mean, in teaching clinical skills versus teaching basic sciences, let's say. But when you're looking at ethics, the teaching has to focus on teaching how can students engage in thoughtful action that turns into repetitive practice, which becomes a habit, which becomes part of their identity formation. If you could figure out how to do that, then you've done great. But until then, it's really up to not only just us on the panel, but literally everybody here to show society, medical schools, and medical students, and future doctors that this is something that's not only important, but essential if we're all going to be successful and flourish.
Thank you very much to all of our panelists. I have to say, this was a truly fantastic conversation. Programs like this are only possible because of people like this who are so committed and so dedicated to the cause. And I think it is both a wonderful way to commemorate the anniversary of Kristallnacht by listening to everything that everybody here had to say, but then, as Ira said, to go out and make a difference and teach in whatever way that is, whether it's formal or informal, whatever we can do, I think we have a responsibility. And I would just like to thank everybody here so much for participating. If you just let the panelists get off the stage, then you can go up and talk to them all you want. We're not going to do formal questions. We're just going to, after everybody kind of gets off the stage. And there are also refreshments outside. So thank you to everyone.